investments and assets outside of Spain wondering whether they have to do the Modelo 720 again this year. In this video, I'm going to discuss the Modelo 720's history, what changes were made last year, when you need to make a declaration and what you need to declare. So if you're ready, let's go. My name is Gerald Turner. I'm a chartered financial planner living here in Spain for the past 14 years. And like I always say in these videos, nothing in this video should be considered to be financial advice. It is merely for informational purposes only. If you want to discuss any issues raised in the video, please get in touch. If we go back 10-15 years or so, Spain was in the grip of a crisis. It started in around 2008 with the great financial crisis, but then it moved on to rock Spain quite hard because they had a housing bubble, which in turn badly affected the banks and also massively increased unemployment in the country. This in turn led on to a huge increase in government debt. The government at the time felt that a lot of wealthy people weren't declaring the assets that they had overseas correctly, and so in 2012 they introduced an amnesty that would allow people to declare their overseas assets and pay a 10% levy on the value of the assets they're declaring. Obviously this didn't quite yield the results they were wanting, because in 2013 the government introduced Modelo 720, which obligated people to declare assets that were worth more than 50,000 euros that were overseas on a Modelo 720 declaration. Obviously once you had made that declaration, you would then be subject to income tax and capital gains tax on those assets that had been declared. They also at the time introduced quite draconian fines for non-declaration or for making mistakes on a Modelo 720. On this slide you can see that you could be fined 1,500 euros for a mistake you made on a declaration. Failure to declare was met with a 5,000 euro fine for each item not declared, but with a minimum fine of 10,000 euros. On top of this, they could also say that the monies that you hadn't declared had been earned that year, resulting in quite large income tax bills on those monies. And on top of that, they would levy a further 150% fine on that tax. In a lot of cases, this would result in the tax being more, or the fines and taxes being more than the amount that was being declared. A famous example of how unjust this was the taxi driver from Granada who had previously lived in Switzerland. He was a retired gentleman who had 340,000 euros in Switzerland and wasn't doing tax returns because he didn't have a high enough income. And so in 2013 the Modelo 720 was introduced, and because he wasn't aware of it, he didn't make a declaration. If we look on this slide, you can see that what they did was, when he did make the declaration 15 months after the introductions of the rules, they gave him a fine of 16,000 euros. They then calculated that he should pay tax on top of this of 172,000 euros, and then a further fine on top of this of 150% of 254,000 euros. So they effectively fined him 442,000 euros for a non-declaration of 340,000 euros. Now the good news is that this was eventually overturned in 2019 by the Spanish courts, but you can imagine the worry for this poor guy for 5 years. A few years ago, a group of Spanish lawyers got together and decided to fight the Spanish government on the rules and the fines around Modelo 720. They took their case to the European Court of Justice, and finally at the beginning of 2022 the European Court of Justice made its ruling. They said that the fines were disproportionate and also that these rules infringed on the European rules around freedom of movement for capital. So quickly the Spanish government made changes to the fines. And at the beginning of 2022, they introduced a fine of €20 for every error, with a minimum of €300 and a maximum of €20,000. The fine can be reduced by 50% if you declare the assets yourself before being notified by the tax office that you have these assets. And fines can be doubled if the assets are held outside the EU, if for example they are held in the United Kingdom. The Spanish government also has to reimburse all the people that they fined over the years. It's believed they may fine around €70 million and fined around 7,000 people. But the overseas declaration has resulted in people declaring €226 billion of assets overseas, which is quite a phenomenal amount. And the Spanish government has been able to raise taxes on those sums. But the declaration was kept in place, and the Spanish government still requires people that live here with assets worth more than €50,000 to make a declaration of those overseas assets on the Modelo 720. So let's discuss what this obligation is. The Modelo 720 obligates people that live in Spain to declare that they have assets in 3 different asset classes worth more than €50,000. So you have to declare the value as at the 31st of December by the 31st of March each year. And you have to do this if you have more than €50,000 in these asset classes. For example, in cash or in bank accounts, in investments, shares or ISAs, or in property. The values declared are those as at the 31st of December. With property, you don't need to go get a new valuation. You should declare the purchase price when you bought the property. If you bought a property for say £35,000 and it's now worth £100,000, you won't need to make that declaration. The value of pensions should be declared where you can access the whole fund. But because it's just a declaration and not a tax raising exercise, I usually advise people to declare it anyway, although you should speak to your accountant about this. Annuities will also have a capitalised value which will need to be declared. Once you have made the declaration in the first year, you'll need to declare again in the following circumstances. If the value of the assets of one of the asset classes has increased by €20,000, if you sell any of the assets previously declared, and if the value of the previously undisclosed assets gets to €50,000 in value in that asset class. So if, for example, you had €40,000 in cash and it's now €55,000 in cash, you have to declare that asset. If we look on this slide, you can see what you need to declare for an overseas asset. You need the name of the investment company, the ISIN number, the amount of shares or units held, the value as at the 31st of December, the percentage of ownership. So if, for example, you held an asset with your wife or husband, you'd need to declare 50% each if it's jointly held, and the dates bought or sold if applicable. So as you can see, it's quite a lot of information that is required to make a Modelo 720 declaration. If the asset is valued in a currency other than euros, then you need to go onto the Banco de España website to find out the official exchange rate. I generally recommend that people employ an accountant or a gestor to do the Modelo 720. You can do it yourself if you wish. You will need to have a digital certificate and make the declaration online. So that's the story of the Modelo 720 and where we are today. If you have any questions or queries around anything I've said here, then please get in touch. Thank you for your attention.